Please join me and welcome Senator Tom Cotton, United States Senator of Arkansas. Senator Cotton is here tonight to present the Henry M. Scoop Jackson Distinguished Service Award to Secretary of State, the Honorable Michael R. Pompeo.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you all very much for the warm welcome. It's great to be back with you tonight to honor my friend, our Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. I want to thank the Jewish Institute for the National Security of America for more than 4 decades of support for the Congress and defense professionals as we make critical decisions about our national security. Your experts and your scholars develop forward-looking policy recommendations to defend our nation and support allies like Israel, our key partner in the Middle East. For instance, your latest report, Atlas-supported, Strengthening the U.S.-Israel Strategic Cooperation, provides many actionable strategies for Congress and the administration. Just last week, for instance, I met with members of JINSA's U.S.-Israel Security Task Force to discuss the report's proposals and to enhance bilateral intelligence sharing and joint research and development programs between Washington and Jerusalem. JINSA's effectiveness in advancing the U.S.-Israel relationship doesn't come without a lot of hard work. To Mike Makovsky, David Steinman, Joel Gamunder, Fred Zeidman, and so many others among your leadership and your staff, I want to say thank you for all of your labors, for all that you have done to secure America and to strengthen our alliance with Israel. And I especially want to thank all the servicemen and servicewomen being honored here tonight. Without you, even the wisest policy would surely fail. Finally, I want to thank and congratulate Secretary Pompeo, who you honor tonight with the Henry M. Scoop Jackson Award. Secretary Pompeo's leadership has demonstrated to Israel and our allies that the United States once again stands with them, that the United States doesn't make idle threats, and that the United States does not appease our enemies. This year alone, thanks to Secretary Pompeo, we've withdrawn from the anti-Israel UN Human Rights Council. We've revoked funding from organizations like the UN Relief and Works Agency that enrich corrupt Palestinian leaders while failing the Palestinian people. We passed and we are implementing the Taylor Force Act to stop subsidizing the Palestinian Authority's payments to the families of terrorists. Last year's Scoop Jackson Award recipient, Sandra Gerber, who's here with us tonight, was instrumental in getting this important legislation through Congress. But the Palestinian Authority still hasn't changed its pay-for-slay laws, so we must remain vigilant and keep the pressure on, as I know Secretary Pompeo will. And finally, at long last, thanks to the President, the American Embassy in Israel is where it belongs, in the eternal capital of the nation of Israel, the city of Jerusalem. Our enemy, the Ayatollahs in Tehran, are on the back foot. Since the President and Secretary Pompeo withdrew from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions, the world is realizing that they must choose between America's mighty economy and Iran's pathetic one. And the result, European companies are leaving Iran in droves. And on November 4th, more sanctions will hit Iran's oil sector. And the Ayatollahs know, they know, that under the President and Mike Pompeo's leadership, the United States will no longer turn a blind eye to their wicked ways. This is quite a record for just a few months as Secretary of State, an office that has been held by some of the most distinguished statesmen in our history. Names like Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Clay, Webster, Marshall, Kissinger. I'm confident that future generations will also look kindly on the name Pompeo, even if they can't pronounce it. Of course, Secretary of State is only the latest accomplishment for Mike Pompeo. He graduated first in his class at West Point. You may have heard a certain president say. He then served with the 2nd Cavalry on the front lines of freedom in Europe at the end of the Cold War. Now, after the Army, it's true, Secretary Pompeo took a wrong turn and became a lawyer. But he turned his life around as a successful businessman in his adopted home of Wichita, Kansas, where his fellow Kansans would later elect him to the House of Representatives in repeated landslides. And of course, he served as our Director of Central Intelligence before being confirmed as the nation's 70th Secretary of State. Nothing about Secretary Pompeo's meteoric rise surprises me because I've known him for as long as I've been in public life. In 2011, when I was an unknown candidate for the House of Representatives, he called me out of the blue, offering his help and support to a fellow veteran. We became fast friends in Congress, traveling around the world together to represent the United States, and on occasion to discover secret nuclear side deals. In 1982, JINSA honored Scoop Jackson with the first Distinguished Service Award, which now appropriately bears his name. In the years since, you've presented the award to Secretaries of Defense, generals and admirals, and legislators. Secretary Pompeo, I must observe, is the first Secretary of State to receive this award. I suspect this reflects not a change in JINSA's views, but rather the badly needed change that Mike Pompeo is bringing to American diplomacy. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming your Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo.
Tom, thank you for the kind introduction. Catherine, it's great to see you. Catherine Herridge is my favorite reporter, but you should know that's a low bar. I love
you were my favorite congressman.
Fair enough. Catherine is not only a very talented reporter, but an incredibly capable woman, and she and her husband are good friends of Susan and mine, so thank you for being part of this event tonight. Tom, those were very kind remarks. Jefferson and Madison, Pompeo, doesn't quite roll off the tongue, but one can always live in hope. I was also reminded when you said that I'm the 70th Secretary of State, and reminded that there's only 45 presidents, so that means there's a lot more turnover in my job than in his, and so I'm going to enjoy the moment. Thank you to Dr. Makovsky for having me here tonight, and thank you everyone at JINSA for this award. I want to accept it on behalf of the entire diplomatic corps, the entire United States State Department, and I'll also accept it as a challenge to keep my foot on the gas at the Department of State. I see a lot of friends here tonight, and I know you all have had a long day, but it is worth recounting what we've done in this administration over the first now coming on 20 months. Let me start with just a basic fact. In the entire Middle East, there's only one consistently pro-American free enterprise democratic nation. It's the people of the state of Israel, and this administration understands that deeply. For the previous 8 years, we had an administration that showed more respect to the leaders of Iran, to the people of Israel. President Obama thought if he made dangerous concessions, removed economic sanctions, and flew a plane full of cash to Tehran, he could somehow hug Iran's leaders into behaving well and rejoining the community of nations. But those leaders aren't from a Disney movie. They're real. They're not tragically misunderstood. They are murderers and funders of terrorism who lead chants today still of death to America. Their goals include profiting off the misery of their own people and wiping Israel off the face of the earth. You know, by and large, I think the American people understand the threat that Iran poses. It's why they opposed the deal that the previous administration made by a margin of 2 to 1, and it's why they sent to our country a very different kind of president in 2016. You know, today, after just under 2 years, there's a long list. Tom talked about some of them, but it's worthy of just grinding through real fast because the magnitude of the change is extraordinary. Tom mentioned the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Common sense, I think. He pulled out of the JCPOA and imposed some of the harshest sanctions in history on the regime in Iran to change its behavior, and more are to follow. He supported the commitment of the largest ever security support of $3.8 billion annually, and he took a stand against anti-Semitism on the world stage by withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council. We have also exposed Hamas for what it really is, and we are making a truly historic push for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. You know, the bottom line, I think, I actually had the privilege to speak with Prime Minister Netanyahu today on a couple of issues of the moment. And we were talking about things a little more broadly, and it reminds me that the bottom line is that the U.S.-Israel relationship is stronger today than it has been ever, and that's good. And that's good for, it's good for both countries. And I want to talk for just a minute, and then I'm going to take a few questions. I want to talk about the challenges that Iran is presenting to Israel, to America, and indeed to the world. Iran has seen this instability in Syria as a golden opportunity to tip the scales. Its goals have included expanding the reach of its Revolutionary Guard, gaining an entrenched position near the Golan Heights, and ultimately establishing a second front from which proxies like Hezbollah can terrorize the Israeli people. Today, the Syrian conflict is reaching a new juncture. Assad has tightened his grip thanks to Russia, Iran, and other regional actors. ISIS, though not completely snuffed out, has been beaten to a shadow of its former self. And these changing circumstances have required the reassignment of America's mission in Syria. Defeating ISIS, which was once our primary focus, continues to be a top priority, but it will now be joined by two other mutually reinforcing objectives. These include a peaceful and political resolution to the Syrian conflict and the removal of all Iranian and Iranian-backed forces from Syria. Under President Trump's leadership, the Department of State has been now engaged in a months-long diplomatic process aimed at making headway on each of these three strategic objectives. Last month at the UN General Assembly in New York, I expressed our full support for UN Security Council Resolution 2254, which sets a political process forward for ending this conflict in Syria, and we're urging every nation to support it. At the UN, we were also encouraged to find increasing international consensus that Iran and its proxies must not be allowed to maintain a foothold in Syria. The onus for expelling Iran from the country falls on the Syrian government, which bears responsibility for its presence there. We've been clear. If Syria doesn't ensure the total withdrawal of Iranian-backed troops, it will not receive $1 single from the United States for reconstruction. Our efforts at the UN were just a small public window into our efforts. I've named a team. Spearheading our effort is Special Representative Jim Jeffries. Many of you would know him. Nobody understands the web of regional interests and the political complexities better than he does. His resume includes ambassadorships in Albania and Turkey and Iraq, among much other parts of his storied career in diplomacy. Meanwhile, to coordinate our efforts on Iran, I've asked Brian Hook to lead our Iran Action Group. We are leading a historic international campaign to apply diplomatic and economic pressure against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Our goal is simple, is to cut off the revenues the regime uses to spread terror and chaos, to fund its nuclear programs and line its own pockets with money that should be given to the Iranian people. The State Department's diplomacy itself is just one part of our interagency effort all across this administration. Underlying this approach is President Trump's unwavering belief that Israel, like all nations, has the right to defend its own sovereignty. That means we'll continue to stand up for its right to target Iranian-backed militias within Syria for as long as that threat remains. Now, I want to leave plenty of time for discussion, so let me close with just one last thought. Israel is everything we want the entire Middle East to look like going forward. It is democratic and prosperous. It desires peace, and it is a home to a free press and a thriving free market economy. Compare that to Iran, whose corrupt leaders assault the human rights of their own people, finance terrorism, and undermine U.S. interests in every corner of the Middle East. Rarely in world affairs is the contrast between two sides so stark. Under President Trump's leadership, the United States is standing where it should firmly be, on the side of Israel. I want to close by, again, thanking you all for being here. To get an award that was named after Scoop Jackson is truly meaningful to me as an amateur historian, and I think important for the Department of State to recognize the good work that it is doing. I will have the opportunity tomorrow to share this with each and every one of the folks who works for me. Thank you all so very much. I look forward to a few questions.